The soil in Henry Caldwell's backyard was old, restless. It cracked in summer, flooded in spring, and held the smell of iron long after the rain had gone. He'd lived in this house for 20 years, a relic from his father, who had passed down the property along with an unspoken expectation. This land was his to care for, to dig into, to mend. It was a modest home on the outskirts of a town that had once been an industrial powerhouse but had withered with time. The roads leading in and out of town were scarred with potholes, and the air smelled faintly of rusted metal. Henry, a mechanic by trade, knew how to make the old run again. He had never imagined himself as someone special. He worked with his hands, fixed cars that belonged to people who barely remembered his name, and spent his evenings watching the sky from his back porch, beer in hand. He understood engines better than he understood people. Machines had a way of speaking that made sense. Worn-out belts told stories of overuse. Clogged fuel injectors whispered of neglect. If only people could be as transparent. On a particular evening in early autumn, Henry decided to expand his garden. The tomatoes had come in strangely small this year, and he figured loosening the earth, maybe adding some fresh compost, might help for the next season. The shovel bit into the ground, deep into the reluctant clay beneath. Then came the clank, a dull, metallic sound, out of place among the roots and dirt. Henry frowned. He dug faster, brushing soil aside with his hands. Soon, a curved surface revealed itself, smooth silver gray, like something that belonged in a future that never arrived. The object was enormous. It took him hours to uncover a full section of it. A vehicle, a machine. His mind raced as his fingers traced the edges of what seemed to be a hatch. His breath came quicker, not from exertion, but from something deeper. Awe, fear, possibility. The night air thickened around him. A breeze carried the scent of damp earth, of old metal waking from a long sleep. Henry wiped the sweat from his brow and stood back, the shovel hanging loosely from his fingers. There was no question about what he would do next. He would fix it. Henry stood over the buried machine, the cold evening air wrapping around him as he considered his next move. The rational part of his mind whispered caution. This was beyond his realm, beyond anything he had ever encountered. But curiosity had always been the greater force in his life. He fetched his toolbox from the garage, the familiar weight of it grounding him. The hatch was sealed, but not impenetrable. Henry traced his fingers along its edges, feeling for weak points. With practiced precision, he wedged a crowbar beneath the seam, applying steady pressure. A hiss of air escaped, stale and heavy, carrying with it the scent of time long past. Inside, the dim glow of unfamiliar instrumentation pulsed faintly. Wires coiled like serpents along the walls, leading to control panels adorned with symbols he could not comprehend. It was a cockpit, or something like it. Henry's pulse quickened. He had expected rust and decay, but the interior was strangely preserved, as though waiting for someone to wake it. He ran his hands over the controls, his mechanics' mind automatically categorizing components. This looked like a power source that resembled an ignition system. Instinctively, he searched for something familiar, a way to bring the machine back to life. A switch stood out among the others, its surface unmarred by dust or corrosion. It was meant to be used. Henry hesitated, his fingers hovering over it. He took a breath, steadying himself. Then, with the decisiveness of a man who'd spent his life repairing the forgotten, he flipped the switch. A low hum reverberated through the chamber, the sound of a dormant heart beginning to beat once more. Lights flickered to life, casting strange shadows against the walls. A screen crackled and then stabilized, displaying unfamiliar symbols that pulsed in a rhythmic pattern. Henry exhaled, a mixture of exhilaration and unease twisting in his chest. Whatever this was, it was waking up, and he was at the center of it. The hum deepened, vibrating through the ground beneath Henry's feet. A series of small lights flickered on, their glow casting an eerie blue hue inside the buried craft. His fingers hovered over the controls, his breath shallow. The machinery was awakening, and he had no idea what he had just set into motion. A sudden surge of energy coursed through the ship. Screens blinked to life, their alien symbols rearranging, shifting, as if responding to his presence. Henry could feel the pulse of the machine, as though it were aware of him. He wasn't sure whether to be thrilled or terrified. His instincts as a mechanic kicked in. He reached for what appeared to be a diagnostic panel, tapping one of the blinking icons. The ship responded instantly. A mechanical hiss filled the chamber as unseen mechanisms unlocked something deeper within. A new section of the cockpit slid open, revealing a chair surrounded by a complex array of instruments. Henry hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. The seat was oddly ergonomic, fitting his body as if designed specifically for him. As soon as he settled in, straps emerged from the sides, securing him in place. His heart pounded. The controls in front of him illuminated in cascading waves, and a voice, soft, artificial, yet oddly human, spoke for the first time. Pilot recognized. Initiating systems check. Stand by. Henry stiffened. Pilot. Recognized? He had no connection to this ship, no prior knowledge of its existence. And yet, it seemed to know him. The realization sent a chill down his spine. The screen in front of him displayed a rotating model of the ship, sections flashing in green and red as the system conducted its analysis. Words in an unfamiliar language scrolled across the display, yet somehow he understood their meaning. Primary thrusters, functional. Navigation systems, partial integrity. Energy core, unstable. The last one made his breath catch. Unstable energy core. That didn't sound good. The hum beneath him grew stronger, and he had the distinct impression that the ship was preparing for something. Before he could react, the ship gave a sudden lurch, as if shifting itself within the ground. The entire hull trembled, sending dust cascading from above. He clenched his jaw, gripping the armrests. Whatever was happening, it was beyond his control now, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. The tremors intensified, shaking loose clumps of soil and rock from the ceiling of the buried chamber. Henry's pulse pounded in his ears as the machine beneath him roared to life. The restraints tightened around his chest and legs, locking him in place. He barely had time to curse before the ship lurched violently upward. Outside the cockpit, the screens displayed a chaotic swirl of data, flashing symbols, status reports, a rapidly shifting altitude meter. He barely understood the information, but one fact was undeniable. The ship was moving. A deep, guttural rumble filled the air, a force unlike anything he had ever experienced. The sensation was more than mechanical. It felt alive, as though the ship was eager, impatient. The walls trembled, and with a final, deafening crack, the ground above gave way. Blinding light flooded the cockpit as the ship burst free, soil and debris raining down in its wake. Henry squeezed his eyes shut against the sudden brilliance, his body pressing against the seat as the craft shot skyward. He struggled for breath, the force of acceleration nearly unbearable. The screen stabilized, and a voice, calm, measured, spoke again. Atmospheric breach imminent. Adjusting trajectory. Henry gasped, forcing his eyes open. The ground was already far below, a patchwork of green and brown shrinking rapidly. The town he had known all his life had become a speck, insignificant in the vast landscape. His fingers dug into the armrests, his mind reeling. Clouds streaked past, wisps of vapor dissipating in the ship's wake. The blue sky deepened, darkened, until the first pinpricks of stars emerged. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. He was leaving Earth. The voice returned. Primary thrusters at optimal efficiency. Course stabilization in progress. Henry's breath came in ragged gasps. This wasn't just an old machine. It was functional. It was powerful. And it was taking him somewhere unknown. Beyond the cockpit glass, the vast emptiness of space yawned before him, infinite and silent. He had spent his life fixing things, grounding himself in the tangible and the known. Now, he was adrift in something far beyond his understanding. And yet, deep within his chest, he felt something strange, something he hadn't expected. A sense of exhilaration. The silence of space was overwhelming. Henry sat rigid in the pilot's seat, his breath shallow as he gazed through the cockpit's transparent canopy. The stars stretched infinitely in all directions, cold and unblinking. A blue shimmer flickered along the edges of the ship's control panel, as if responding to his racing thoughts. Then, a shift. The ship adjusted course on its own, banking slightly toward a distant point that Henry couldn't yet perceive. His fingers flexed against the armrests, his nerves taut. He was used to control, to understanding machines, to fixing what was broken. But this was different. This ship didn't need repairs. It needed him. A low vibration thrummed through the hull. Henry glanced at the readouts on the central display. A new symbol pulsed, something that hadn't been there before. It was circular, with rotating lines intersecting its center, an activation signal of some kind. Input required, the voice announced, calm and unwavering. Henry hesitated. Input. Input for what? His voice sounded small in the vast emptiness. The screen responded with shifting symbols, rearranging themselves into something recognizable. Coordinates. A destination. He didn't know where they led. He didn't know if he should confirm the command. But the ship seemed to be waiting, expecting him to decide. Henry swallowed, his pulse steadying. He had spent his life fixing things, always looking backward, tethered to the past. But now, the unknown stretched before him, vast and endless. He reached forward, pressing his hand against the glowing interface. The ship surged forward into the darkness. Henry's fingers trembled as the ship surged forward, accelerating toward the unknown. The vastness of space stretched before him, an ocean of silent possibility. His body pressed against the seat as the ship's thrusters roared, the star-speckled darkness outside shifting into a dizzying blur. His heart pounded. He had always lived in a realm of machines, of logic and precision, but this was something else entirely. This was destiny unfolding beneath his hands. A blaring alarm shattered the quiet hum of the cockpit. The main display flickered red. The ship had encountered something, an anomaly. Before he could react, the ship buckled, shaking violently, as if resisting an unseen force. His hands gripped the controls instinctively, but they were unresponsive. A deep vibration coursed through the ship's core. The same calm, artificial voice returned, but for the first time, it sounded strained. System integrity compromised. Critical energy surge detected. Structural failure imminent. Henry's breath caught. He was being pulled into something vast, a force unlike anything he had ever encountered. The anomaly wasn't just an obstacle. It was alive. Tendrils of shimmering energy wrapped around the ship, constricting its movement, dragging it toward a swirling abyss of light and shadow. He had a choice: fight or surrender. Every instinct screamed at him to resist, to reroute the ship's power, to force an escape. But deep down, something told him that this was meant to happen, that the ship had brought him here for a reason. Gritting his teeth, he abandoned the controls and reached for the central interface. If the ship had accepted him as its pilot, then he had to trust it now. "Tell me what I need to do," he murmured, pressing his palm against the glowing panel. The ship responded instantly. The screens flooded with new symbols, schematics, energy patterns, data streams. But at the center of it all, one phrase emerged, written in a language that was both alien and, somehow, familiar. "You are the key." A jolt of understanding coursed through him. He had spent his life repairing what was broken, restoring life to dead machines. And now, the ship itself needed him. It wasn't just a vessel. It was a being, a creation with a purpose unfulfilled. He could feel it calling to him, needing his touch, his knowledge, his ability to fix what had been abandoned. Henry took a deep breath and focused. He traced the ship's energy flow, feeling out its weak points. The anomaly was feeding off its power source, draining it, disrupting its stability. He needed to sever the link before the ship was consumed entirely. He worked quickly, rerouting energy through auxiliary pathways, redistributing the strain. The ship groaned, resisting at first, but then it stabilized. The tendrils of energy faltered, losing their grip. Henry pushed harder, overriding the ship's failing systems, forcing them back into alignment. A final surge. A last desperate push. With a deafening crack, the anomaly shattered. The ship catapulted forward, breaking free from its grasp. The force sent Henry reeling, his vision blurring as light engulfed the cockpit. Then, silence. The ship drifted. Henry gasped for breath, his hands shaking. The screens flickered back to life, displaying normal readings. He had done it. He had saved them both. But something was different. Outside the canopy, the stars no longer stretched in familiar patterns. A massive celestial body loomed before him, its surface shimmering with an iridescent glow. The ship had brought him here, to a place unknown to any human. The voice returned, steady and certain. Destination reached. Henry exhaled, a slow smile creeping across his face. He had spent his life fixing the past. Now, he was stepping into the future, and he was ready.